Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to answer a couple questions that I was getting in the comments, and it was more about me answering some questions, and it stems with what attracted me to the GS-F over other cars. My wife and I started our search for a GS-F in January 2020, December 2019, when these cars were still being produced, and we didn't want to buy a brand new one just because at the price point, we didn't want to spend almost $100,000 on one of these. We were looking at the 2016, 2017s, which were in the area of $50,000 to $60,000 instead of $90,000 or $100,000. Now, the reason we were looking for the GS-F over something else was primarily you hear about the Toyota reliability, and that's no different than these. These just have a slightly higher running cost because, of course, the buy-in was higher. So you have a more expensive car, it's going to be a little bit more expensive to maintain. It's not going to be like Mercedes S-Class terrible reliability or anything like that, but again, the Toyota reliability, I've owned Toyotas in the past, I've owned Hondas, I've owned Nissans, primarily Japanese cars. And so that was something that sort of piqued my interest. I knew these existed the entire time. Like even when they were introduced back in 2015, I was well aware of them. They were on my radar, but it wasn't something that I really sat down and thought about like, wow, you know what? I really want one of those. And I think what changed that for me was having kids. And so previously, prior to having kids, I had two-door sports cars because it was just my wife and I. We had the Z32 300ZX. That was kind of my go-to forever. And you talk about, I've got the tattoo. I've had over 20 of them in my lifetime, and I've been into them basically since I sat in one in a showroom in 1991 in a Nissan dealer. That was sort of what hooked me on those. But I've done a lot of modifications. Those of you that are really familiar with me know that I was one of the guys that had the RB26 swapped Z32. There's only 2 or 3 of them in existence. Mine was the second one. Did a lot of talking with the guy that did the first one in Illinois, he's since moved on to GTRs and things like that. But that was a big part of my life for a long period. And I guess the wake-up call was, I got rid of that, thinking that I didn't want something as unreliable. And it wasn't that it was unreliable, it was an old car. So it was just an ongoing project as an old car, and it just cost an unbelievable amount of money all the time. When something breaks, especially you add an RB26 in there, it makes it even harder. So I got rid of that and I bought a GT350R Mustang. And so there's very few of those, low production. I tracked the absolute hell out of that car to the tune of about 7,500 track miles, and spent a lot of time at Eagles Canyon, Motorsport Ranch Crescent, Hallett, and Circuit of Americas. So it did get tracked quite a bit. It's not my first car I've tracked, and you see this behind me. This is not going to ever be tracked. I have other plans for stuff like that. It was something that this car was something that I could haul the family around, be comfortable when it needs to be. It can be fast and rowdy when it wants to be. Of course, it's bright orange. That originally was not the plan. We were looking for a USB ultrasonic blue mica with a red interior, which is a pretty common combo on these cars, but we couldn't find the right one at the time. So what were other cars we were considering? Well, the E63 AMG was one, as well as the M5. I'm kind of a sucker for the E39 M5, and those were just starting to creep up in value, and during COVID, the prices went absolutely insane to the point where I wanted a car I could get in and drive and not have to worry about it. E39s, they're reliable-ish, but again, the old car problems start to come into play when you're talking about now a 25-year-old car. So I wanted something more modern that I could just get in and go. My wife wants to be able to drive it, so I don't want to have to worry about, you have to hold the key a certain way or hold certain, things like that to just get it to run. And so this kind of checked all those boxes. And so that's where it came from. Now, me not being able to leave good enough alone, of course, I did other stuff to it. And you've seen in other videos, I put carbon ceramic brakes. I put the Japanese orange interior in it, you know, the fancy exhaust. There's other things that I do to just make it unique for me, but I don't build it for other people's approval. I do it for me. And so you guys are just kind of along for the ride. And, you know, that's where the whole GS-F spreadsheet was born. Was when I started looking for these, I realized there's not very many for sale, so how many exist? And so, you know, it took me 4 years to amass that spreadsheet, and so you guys get to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The search for these cars is kind of what really took a whole lot longer than I thought, and it took me watching this happen a couple times to finally realize, like, when you're serious about these cars, you have to step up and put a deposit on them right away, or they'll go away. You won't be able to get it. And so when these cars during the COVID mania, the prices started going crazy, we kind of stepped away from it a little bit and said, you know, they'll come back down, and there's always a risk that they'll continue to go up. Why did it take my wife and I so long to find one of these? We started in probably December 2019, January 2020, when these cars were still being produced, but we didn't want to drop $100,000+ on one of these out the door. And so we were kind of looking at the 16, 17s in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. And this was a pretty common lesson, I guess, that you'll see that others have run into when buying these cars, is that the good ones get snatched up very quickly. And so we were serious, but I wouldn't say we were like 100% serious. We were like 75, 80%, where, you know, if the right one came along, we would start inquiring, and if everything ticked all the right boxes, we would go ahead with the purchase. And what we did is we had a couple that were sort of like that, and by the time we were actually talking with each other and agreed to buy it, we would then talk again to the dealership, and they're like, well, sorry, the car's been sold. And so that happened more than a couple times. And then on top of that, you have kind of what I'd call unscrupulous dealers where, you know, we're in Texas, and I saw one in Washington State, and this car, it ticked everything. It had like 7,000 miles on it. It was ultrasonic blue mica with red interior, no accident, one owner, clean title. Like, I mean, it was the dealership owner's personal vehicle. And so this dealership, we called them up, we said, all right, we're gonna go ahead and put a deposit down on it. And so then that gives me time to arrange transportation. We wanted to fly up there and go see it in person, which, you know, everything should have worked anyway. But so we went ahead and put a deposit down, refundable deposit, and starting to get everything in order, get airline tickets, things like that. And I don't know, it was about a week later, we called the dealership, said, all right, you know, we'll wire you the rest of the money. And they're like, well, as a matter of fact, the car's no longer available. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, they had somebody physically there in person the same day. People weren't talking, the left hand wasn't talking to the right, and they sold the car, even though I had already put a deposit down prior. And nobody said anything for a week. You know, so pretty kind of crappy thing to do where we already had arrangements in place, and then the car's no longer available. And so that kind of put a bad taste in our mouth. And then we continued along looking for a while. The right one just didn't come along in 2020. And so then come COVID, and the prices start going crazy, 2020, 2021. And so we just kind of, we put the search, we were always continually searching, but we just weren't actively searching because I didn't want to overpay for a car. And I felt like at that point, with the prices going crazy, that I didn't want to do that. So we continued back on, and more seriously, 2023. And so that's where this started to happen. And this car in particular wasn't even up for about 45 minutes on a Saturday, and I was feeling terrible. I saw it online and called him up, said, all right, let's do this. Let's put a deposit down. I paid for a pre-purchase inspection of it, and everything checked out. I knew it was going to need front tires because of the lower control arm bushings they wears out the inside of the front tires, and it needed brakes. And so I kind of knew what was to be expected there, but it was a clean title, 2-owner, low mile car, and it had paint protection film on it from the beginning, but it needed the paint protection film replaced. So again, I knew that the price was good. I wasn't specifically seeking out a molten pearl, an orange car, but it was there. We jumped on it, and here it is. The rest is history. So now we've had it a little over a year and a half, and I mean it's an outstanding car. It has had all of the common issues: the carbon fiber trim delamination, the valley plate leak, the lower control arm bushings, the brakes. I mean, it's just it had all of the common issues, and that's to be expected. I'm not worried about those as long as the bones are good, which is the clean title, no accidents for me. So, you know, I felt like I'm kind of rambling on there, but that's kind of my story on how this came to be, and hope that answers a couple of your questions that I had seen in the comments. So thanks again, guys, for watching. Make sure you thumbs up this video, helps out the algorithm, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.